This is my new editing and gaming PC. One of the fastest gaming PCs that you can build right now, all packed into this mini ITX form factor. Ever since I got introduced to the world of small form factor builds about a year ago, all I've wanted to do was build an endgame PC inside of a mini ITX case. Something that could handle virtually anything that I threw at it in terms of gaming or video editing, and this right here is the end result, or at least for now. I mean, coming from a very randomly put together Fractal Terra build to a beast of a 4090 PC, I would say that I am fully in the deep end of small form factor builds. And I think we have to start with the main attraction of this PC, which is the case. I mean, if Apple were to make a PC case, I feel like it would look something like this. It's called the Nanoq S by Thorzone, and it's relatively new to hit the market. The team is still kind of refining it, which we'll talk about in a second, but I still think we have to appreciate just how good looking this case is. Now, this is an 11-liter ITX case in the graphite colorway. For visual reference, it's about the same size as the Fractal Terra, just slightly taller and a little bit longer, but that extra space actually goes a long way, which you'll see during the build. Now, right off the bat, you might notice that you can't actually spot a single screw holding the outside of this case together, and that's because there aren't any. The outer shell is just one giant piece of CNC'd metal, and because it's one piece, you don't get weird things like panel gaps or inconsistency across the finish. And I mean, there's no denying this thing looks pretty awesome, and I just love the slats around the outside. There's this nice concave on either end. It really is unlike any ITX case that I've seen, which is what drew me to it in the first place. The latch mechanism to seal and release the outer shell is pretty interesting as well. You press down on these two front panels and that will unlock the case, allowing you to slide out the frame. But we do have to address the elephant in the room, I think, and that's with the actual slide design itself. Even with low friction tape on the inside, I found that just sliding this thing in and out is actually a pain a lot of the time. Of course, you're not going to be like removing the shell every single day or anything, but you'd think with how nice it looks on the outside that experience would carry all the way through. But unfortunately, in this case, it just kind of misses the mark. Now, I'm not the only one to complain about this, but the good news is Thorzone is extremely receptive to feedback, and they're actually already working on a fix for that. I think it's by enlarging the actual guides on the inside frame. So hopefully it's a simple fix, but yeah, for now, I have to be critical of that. Now, once you take the shell off, of course, you'll be left with the frame, which at first glance might seem concerningly bare, but everything's actually right where it needs to be. Mounting points for the power supply, GPU, motherboard, all of that stuff, it's all here, and it's basically just hiding in plain sight. Similar to the Terra, this case also has an adjustable spine, which is nice depending on how much room you need for your GPU. And building in this case is an interesting experience. Since this is meant to be my editing and gaming PC, and I kind of wanted it to just be an overkill build, we do have the 4090 Founders Edition in here, but we're actually talking about the GPU first, because I didn't realize you're supposed to install the GPU first. Now, this is due to the newly added support bracket down at the bottom here for the GPU to help it from wobbling, but the screw holes for that are actually covered when you put the motherboard in. So you have to put the GPU in first before adding everything else. But if for some reason you're following this as a build guide, that's why you don't see me putting the GPU in first, because I'd put it in like the traditional order. And for that motherboard that's covering the screw holes, we're going with one of the most insane ITX motherboards that I've had the chance to build with, which is the Asus X670 Strix. I mean, this thing's just crazy. They've gone ahead and built vertically to add extra M.2 slots when they ran out of room. You have two small onboard fans on the back, a whole separate controller to plug into the back if you need to do things like BIOS flashback or things like adjust audio if you don't have, say, an audio interface. I mean, this is really one of the most feature-packed ITX boards that I know of. Even the rear I/O on this thing is crazy. I mean, there's just no shortage of USB ports on here, including two USB 4 Type-C ports, which I really appreciate because I do a lot of file transferring on SSDs. And of course, if you're already familiar with mini ITX builds or just gaming PCs in general right now for that reason, the CPU choice that I made, the Ryzen 7800 X3D, should come as no surprise. It's just been one of the best CPUs on the market for gaming right now, especially in ITX builds. The 1200 watt TDP makes it easier to manage heat in compact spaces. Its large L3 cache gives you both fast gaming performance as well as improved memory access. And on top of gaming, it should also be great for content creation just due to that top tier single and multi-threaded performance. Now, for storage, I first decided to move over my existing 2TB Corsair MP600 Pro NH. I already had Windows set up on there and I didn't feel like doing that again. But we're also adding another Corsair 2TB MP700 Pro, and the specs on that drive are kind of ridiculous. PCIe Gen 5 with write speeds of 11,800 megabits per second, which I feel like should be illegal. I mean, that's nearly double the speed of the MP600. And the goal here is to have great sustained write speed when I'm transferring a ton of footage, which is something that I do on a near daily basis. Continuing on the Corsair train, we have 64 gigabytes of RAM in here. Vengeance DDR5 6000 megahertz to speed should be fine for doing things like gaming or multitasking, but that 64GB capacity should be good for heavier workloads like editing or 3D rendering. They're also a bit lower profile than normal RAM sticks, which I figured would be helpful for this build, and I also forgot to put them in when I was preparing the motherboard because I was filming, so don't do that. Now for the power supply, you'd probably think I went for the Corsair SF750, but I also noticed they had an SF1000 on their website, so I kind of was just curious. It's the exact same size, still 80 plus platinum rated, but it offers a lot of headroom in case I want to do further upgrades. Now, one thing that I would highly recommend with small form factor builds is a set of custom cables. These ones are actually from Bespoke Baka, so huge shout out to them. They absolutely nailed it. And while there's nothing wrong with using the cables that come with the power supply, having shorter cables just makes building in this a lot easier. Not even this one, just any ITX case for that matter. I definitely recommend putting in the AIO before you do the power supply. This is a 240mm Ace-Tech AIO that has a relatively low face, making it nice for this build. And the best configuration I found here was one slim fan for under the motherboard and then a regular fan under the power supply, with both fans pointed towards the radiator for the best thermal performance. And I do want to note, it might be worth putting a fan guard on this fan just because it's right by all the power supply cables. I didn't really have any issues with that once I just pushed them around a little bit, but something to note if you're worried about them getting caught up. But yeah, when all said and done, this is the final build and my main PC as of today. It's an extremely dense 4090 build that I gotta say, I think looks awesome. Closing the case, I didn't really have any issues. You just have to take your time guiding the outer shell down. To quote Thorzone, there's no such thing as going too slow. And in terms of performance, well, here are the results. Running a 20-minute stress test with 3D Mark at 100% GPU load, I saw GPU temps hovering right around the 76-degree mark. But yeah, for games like CS2 or other things that I typically play, handles it no problem. Now the case obviously does have some weird quirks, but I do really appreciate how receptive to feedback Thorzone has been. But I would also hope so because this case costs $350 US, so there's no denying that's a lot of money for a PC case. So obviously, assuming you're willing to pay that price, you don't want it to come with a bunch of these random headaches during the build. But the good news is they seem to be on top of it. That aside, I seem to be going deeper and deeper into this small form factor world every single day, and that plus the 50 series cards right around the corner, I'm super excited for what's to come.